Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unlocking the fascinating, mostly invisible world of translation by looking right through the lens of one of its absolute greatest modern theorists, Peter Newmark. Whether you're a dedicated language enthusiast, a linguistics student, or honestly just someone who enjoys a perfectly dubbed international movie on a Friday night, you are about to see language in a completely new light. We're going to dive deep into Newmark's comprehensive theories on how a master translator actually goes about their work, ultimately transforming a rigid block of text into a highly fluid, invisible art form. So right off the bat, I want you to ask yourself a question. Is translation just swapping words from one dictionary to another? Really think about it. Because, well, if you've ever typed a complex, nuanced sentence into an automated online translator and gotten back an incredibly confusing, robotic mess, you already know the answer. Today, we're going to completely shatter the illusion that translation is some simple mechanical process. Instead, we're going to explore the deeply complex psychological reality of what human translators actually do behind the scenes to make words cross borders. All right, here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Beyond the dictionary. 2. The 4 levels. 3. The quest for naturalness. 4. 6 functions. 5. Words and grammar. And finally, number 6. The final polish. Okay, let's dive into section 1. Beyond the dictionary, breaking the illusion. To set the record straight on what translation is completely not, Peter Newmark explicitly warns against what he calls freak methods of translation. This includes relying entirely on bilingual dictionaries, or honestly, just continuously, loosely paraphrasing the source material until it sounds kind of okay. Listen, if you treat a source text simply as a list of independent words to be swapped out one by one, you are going to entirely fail to capture the actual meaning. True translation is actually this incredibly dynamic, multidimensional problem-solving exercise. It carries a ridiculously heavy cognitive load where the translator is constantly actively balancing grammar, context, author intent, and literal physical reality all at the same time. Moving right along to section 2, the 4 levels, a 3D chess game. To manage that immense cognitive load we just talked about, Newmark argues that you don't just read a sentence, you actually operate on 4 levels simultaneously. It's honestly a lot like playing a game of 3-dimensional chess. These 4 levels act as your essential toolkit. First, there's the source language text level. This is the literal language, the base grammar and vocabulary you automatically begin converting in your head. Second is the referential level. Third, the cohesive level, and fourth, the level of naturalness. You don't just do one step after the other in a neat little predictable line. No, a professional translator's mind literally bounces between these 4 distinct levels continuously to break down and rebuild the text. Let's look a little closer at what these deeper levels actually mean in practice. So the absolutely crucial point here is that words are merely stand-ins for reality. At the referential level, a translator must penetrate what Newmark brilliantly calls the fog of words. You literally have to pause and ask yourself, what is actually happening in this scene? Can you visualize it vividly in your mind's eye? For instance, if a medical text talks about the deterioration of cells, you need to mentally see that actual biological process occurring. You build a firm, solid image of the reality behind the text, and you translate for that specific reality, not just for the author's specific vocabulary. Ultimately, as a translator, you are responsible for the truth of the picture being painted. Then we have the cohesive level. You can think of this level as the master regulator. It takes the literal text you read and links it with the physical reality you just visualized. And it basically traces 2 vital things. The structure, so we're talking about the connectives, the conjunctions, the underlying train of thought, and then the mood. You have to ask, is the tone positive? Is it negative? Is it completely stone-cold neutral? Is the author deliberately using value-laden words like disaster instead of just setback, or awesome instead of just tidy? This structural level secures the overarching cohesiveness of your translation. It makes absolutely sure the precise emotional emphasis lands exactly where it should for the reader. Now, what's really interesting is section 3, the quest for naturalness, the ultimate balance. This introduces the ultimate balancing act of the whole profession, the level of naturalness. Newmark explicitly states that naturalness is a touchstone at every single level of a text. Look, unless you are translating an ultra-strict authoritative political speech, or maybe a piece of highly innovative poetry where you actively want to preserve the author's weird, unique quirks, the vast majority of texts simply must read naturally. They have to read seamlessly. It should feel exactly as if it were originally written in ordinary language, perfectly adapted to the specific writer and the situation at hand.
But here's the thing. Finding this naturalness is incredibly difficult.
You actually have to temporarily disengage yourself entirely from the source text so you don't get trapped by its foreign grammar. A great example of this is cognates. Those are words that look remarkably similar in two different languages, and they are huge traps for amateur translators. For instance, a French phrase might literally, word for word, translate to, after having given his meter a satisfied glance. Sure, it makes sense, but a natural English translation would simply be, after checking his meter with satisfaction. The translator must intentionally step back, completely detach from the clunky literal phrasing, and actively seek out the target language's natural conversational rhythm and flow. Which brings us to Section 4, 6 functions, guiding the strategy. But how does a translator actually know which rules to apply at any given moment? Like, when do you prioritize literal strict accuracy versus smooth conversational naturalness? Well, that depends entirely on the text itself. Identifying a text's primary function absolutely dictates the entire translation strategy. If a text is deemed expressive, the translator uses a semantic approach, meaning they stay very, very close to the author's original words and syntax. But if the text is vocative or informative, the translator relies on a communicative approach. That means they prioritize the reader's ease of understanding and natural flow way over strict literalness. Let's break down these big three language functions. First, the expressive function. This is driven entirely by the mind of the writer. Think of serious literature, deeply personal autobiographies, or those authoritative political speeches. Here, you respect the author's exact phrasing. Second is the informative function, and this is driven by external reality and hard facts. Think textbooks, scientific reports, daily news articles. Here, absolute truth and clarity are king. Third is the vocative function, driven entirely by the readership. Think of public notices, instruction manuals, or political propaganda. The whole goal here is to provoke an immediate action or reaction from the reader, so the language has to be forceful and immediately impactful. Now, beyond the big three, Newmark points out three minor functions that present some highly unique and honestly fascinating challenges. First is the aesthetic function, which is all about pleasing the senses through rhythm and sound. Imagine translating a rhyming children's poem where the bouncy sound actually matters far more than the literal meaning of the words. Then there's the phatic function. This is about maintaining friendly contact. These are standard cultural greetings like, "How are you?" or "Lovely to see you." You absolutely cannot translate those literally across borders. It just doesn't work. Finally, the metalingual function. This is when language explains language, like a textbook trying to explain a specific French grammar rule to an English speaker. That requires some really heavy, clever cultural adaptation. All right, let's look at Section 5, Words and Grammar, Practical Challenges. Having established all those overarching theories, we can now zoom in on the highly practical, day-to-day challenges translators face right there on the page. Translators face this massive word problem, where most common nouns have up to 4 entirely distinct types of meaning. Take the French word maison. Physically, it means a literal house. Figuratively, it means a family home. Technically, it can mean a business firm, and colloquially, it means something is first-rate. Or the word poire. Physically, it means a pear. Figuratively, it's a shape. Technically, it means a switch, and colloquially, it means a sucker or a face. You literally cannot just use a dictionary. You have to use the deep context to unlock which of the 4 meanings is currently active. Because context absolutely always overrides the literal dictionary, always. Newmark gives this fantastic, super memorable example of this. The French phrase, son visage était mauve. A literal dictionary swap gives you, his face was mauve. But in English, describing someone's face as mauve sounds utterly bizarre, and probably even a little comical. However, in France, mauve is traditionally a color associated with mourning, so the correct natural English translation for a face in this specific grim context is actually deathly pale. Translating it as mauve would just be a massive failure of both cultural and linguistic naturalness. And that leads us to our final section, number 6, the final polish, the revision stage. So you've analyzed the text function, you've operated on 4 different cognitive levels, and you've navigated the dangerous minefield of colloquial words. Now comes the final phase, revision. Newmark points out a staggering fact that most people just don't realize. A professional translator spends 50 to 70% of their total working time just on revising. This is the crucible where the intense pulling tension between strict accuracy and natural, beautiful flow is finally resolved. You are constantly paring down your version, ruthlessly eliminating unnecessary paraphrasing, and making absolutely sure that not a single tiny nuance of the original sense is lost in the transfer. Newmark leaves us with this powerful, really grounding thought. A great translation is also a work of art in its own right. But a good translation, even of a great work, need not be so. I love that. It highlights that while translation fundamentally demands immense scientific precision, deep psychological analysis, and rigid methodology, reaching the absolute highest level of the craft truly elevates it from a mechanical, daily task into a genuinely beautiful art form. So let's wrap up our deep dive into Peter Newmark's comprehensive framework. Translation is far, far more than a simple dictionary exercise. It is a highly complex, multi-layered cognitive process. It is governed entirely by the core function of the original text, whether that text aims to express, inform, or provoke. It requires a delicate, constant, agonizing balance between strict scientific accuracy and smooth conversational naturalness. And ultimately, when it's done correctly and with real passion, it is a form of rigorous, incredibly demanding academic scholarship. The next time you sit down to read a beautifully translated novel, use a localized smartphone app, or watch a dubbed international film, I want you to pause for a second. Actively ask yourself, what invisible choices did the translator make to bring this piece of media to you? How many different levels of reality did they have to construct in their mind, and how many literal, strict language rules did they have to intentionally break just so the words would sound perfectly natural to your ears? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the media you consume and keep learning.